Religion is the most personal and closest identity for devotees because it essentially molds their lives with values that make them human society more benevolent and less savage. However, this is not always the case, as seen in a state that have fallen into the grip of Islamic fanaticism, with Bangladesh as the latest example. Hello and welcome to Think for India. I'm your host Parish Gupta. In this video, we will delve deeper into the case of how Bangladesh is not alone, but the latest in the string, and how the pressing issue of radicalized Islamic democracy is haunting many nations, with only a few nations may have learned their lesson timely. Let's begin. It remains no hidden truth that the student protest in Bangladesh was a disguise to foster fundamentalism as a state policy, as these so-called protesters gradually took the authorities for a ride by getting top brass including PM Sheikh Hasina and the Chief Justice resign. The obsession with the Islamic regime and against Hasina's non-radical approach was so far that the so-called student protesters tried to paint the coup d'etat as a revolution and went on a rampage demanding a new constitution in light of this revolution. It is horrific for an idealized society that the regime change is being glorified when the jihadis are being released from jail, minorities Hindus are getting persecuted, and the country's economic condition is faltering. They do not even realize that the constitution is a living law for the idealized societies that the savage Islamic democracy does not need. The country's economic condition has worsened to an all-time low. The garment industry, which was the backbone of the Bangladeshi economy, has suffered significantly. According to reports, the so-called protests have cost the industry some 400 billion US dollars. Surprisingly, no step has been taken to revive the ailing sector, as the regime finds itself busy whitewashing the crimes of jihadis and legitimizing what has continued to uphold in the anarchy-gripped nation since 5th August. Meanwhile, the burning of resources in fundamental practices and financing jihadis has made the economy so fragile that it cannot even pay its electricity dues. The coal-firing industry, which was already hit and import was nearly shut, Adani Power recently halved the power supply for not clearing the outstanding dues. Bangladesh case is not unique, as Pakistan exists as another testament to the ramifications of fanaticism as a state policy. Pakistan's detriment to fundamentalism started on the day of independence, with the current condition as the worst. At the behest of the Pakistan army, a crusade of converting minorities, especially Hindus, is running all across Pakistan. The extent of fundamentalism in Pakistani society can be understood by the fact that there is capital punishment for blasphemy. This law provides free moral ground for public execution. More recently, a man was killed over blasphemy charges by a policeman who was accorded with grand welcome upon getting bail. The state-sponsored or state approval, rather I say, to say the least, killings highlight the failure of the society in Pakistan. The case of terror as a state policy is another heinous phase of the Islamic regime of Pakistan. Suffices to say that this cladding of extremism leaves no room for the state to become a normal society, hence the economic and social situation remains grim in Pakistan. Such cases are also easy to find in West Asia. The example of Islamic revolution in Iran and how fundamentalism has led to the growth of only the elite. In contrast, the commoner's life remained devastated. Interestingly, Bangladesh case is similar to Iran's in many aspects. Both countries yielded regime change with agitation, and contemporary leaders of both erstwhile regime fled the country. In both cases, the triggers were issues like unemployment and financial conditions. Nevertheless, the Islamic takeover of Iran by Shia clergy initiated a trend of ideological expansion, which Khomeini utilized to unleash Islamic terrorism organizations in the neighborhood. Take another case of Lebanon. It was a well-known Christian majority but a diverse and secular nation. Mostly peaceful, the country witnessed a violent transition to an Islamic regime, and everything changed within 15 years of civil war. The religious extremism ripped apart the entire secular fabric of the country, making it an Islamic haven full of fundamentalists and jihadi groups. Without a doubt, these seeds have fructified in the form that the country now is the birthplace of Hezbollah, a dreaded terrorist group. Yemen is also no exception. The fundamentalist Houthis started a civil war that sent a major chunk of land to the clutches of from Pakistan to Yemen and whatever such cases is left. The first and foremost reason for the present condition of these countries and the threat they poses to the world is Islamic fundamentalism. However, it is bitter truth that most people neither accept it nor they want to be confronted with it because of their ideological compulsions and petty short-sighted political gains. The most important question that lies ahead of us is, has this stopped with Bangladesh? The answer to this question is negative. This must be noted that whatever happened in Bangladesh was not because of any momentary stimulus. Rather, it was a jihadi desire of the radicalized mind that was under the veil until it caught the garb of the quota system as a trigger. Currently, a similar dire situation can be seen in most countries of Europe where the native population is on the decline and the immigrant Muslim population is contrarily rising. The radicalized mindset can be understood by the fact that they came as immigrant because they do not have access to basic amenities like food. But what are they demanding? Sharia in Europe. The rising Islamic population, the takeover of the streets in religious processions, survival on state support while hurting it, attacks on the native population, and open mic threats of imposition of Sharia are some of the most common problems in Europe these days. A case in point was the emergence of grooming gangs in the UK. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman had categorically singled out Pakistani Muslim men as part of the grooming gang that used to harass minor natives. But there was no action then because of the lack of willpower and apprehensions of being tagged as Islamophobic and racist. However, Rishi Sunak later took some action after which such incidents were reduced. But is it over? Quite the opposite. The threat of rising Islamic extremism remains intact. Taking the case of Germany, thousands of Muslims, mostly immigrants, hit the streets of Hamburg in April this year. They voiced for imposition of Sharia law in Germany. Despite the startling sloganeering, it may be seen to be a casual protest by a community, unless one takes note of the fact that the protest was called by Muslim Interactive, an offshoot of the band Hizbut Tahrir. Protests like these, which are fueled from the outside, are the ones that topple governments. To present it in facts, according to an OICAD's 2022-2023 report, there was a 44% increase in crimes against Christians in these 2 years in Europe, making it very clear how things are going in Europe. The way out of this menace is to understand that political correctness in dealing with such delicate issues is similar to an emotional doctor during brain surgery. There can be no scope for leniency while dealing with fundamentalism, especially Islamic fundamentalism. The extremist in any form needs to be rooted out at the outset. It is interesting to note that deepening Islamic fundamentalism being the prevalent case of misery in these countries, some of the earliest Islamic countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE, among others, are on the way of prosperity. The reason for that is their understanding of the demands of the contemporary world and clarity about the potential of Islam as a tool for fanaticism. A peaceful nation can only survive when it is flexible towards religion. In the process of becoming one, these predominant Islamic countries rooted out the fanaticism and fundamental elements from their society. Unfortunately, India's condition is also not very good. It is time that India and Europe learn their lessons before it becomes too late.